Good morning. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us during the Lytham Partner Winter 2021 Investor Conference. My name is Robert Breza, Vice President of Lytham Partners. During this fireside chat, we welcome CEO Alvaro Torres of Khiron Life Services, ticker symbol KHRN on the TSXV and KHRNF on the OTCQX. Before we begin, those not familiar with Lytham Partners, it's one of the company's leading investor relations firms with more than 2 decades of corporate access experience. We've built one of today's most diverse and effective platforms for connecting small cap companies with higher quality institutional investors and creating a framework for best practices. We will dive into a Q&A session in a moment. I want to remind everyone that Khiron is available for one-on-one meetings. If you have not already signed up, send me an email at Breza, B-R-E-Z-A, @lythampartners.com or visit www.lythampartners.com/virtual and click on the one-on-one meeting request button. With that said, let's begin. Alvaro, could you please introduce the company, provide a brief overview and specifically your background to help investors understand how the company was created and the potential you see? Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. First of all, good morning. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. As you know, well, I co-founded this company 4 years ago with the objective of being the leading business-to-consumer medical cannabis company in Lytham and Europe. We started medical cannabis sales in Lytham about 1.5 years ago, and I would say that the track record, the growth that we're having, the profitability of our B2C strategy is actually showing that we are the leading company in these markets, which are really just starting. But in terms of population, in terms of number of people who need medical cannabis, I think the opportunity it's very large, certainly bigger than other markets that have already started 4 or 5 years ago. I think the entire purpose of the company has always been, how do we improve the quality of life of people? How do we create demand? How do we convince doctors and patients to start prescribing medical cannabis? And combining really good product quality with a strategy that's all about servicing patients through our own clinic network, where we are now in the process of having clinics in Colombia, Peru, Brazil, the UK, and very soon into Mexico. And that strategy allows us to capture patients, train doctors, and convert most of these pain and neurological patients into medical cannabis, enjoying 85% plus type of gross profitability and building ourselves a very unique niche where we see very little competition. My background, as you know, it's engineering, Rob. So I went to school in the United States for my undergraduate, master's, and my MBA. So 8 years there, and it's mostly focused on engineering projects, entrepreneurship, and building companies that have very strong foundations. And I think the entire basis of Khiron, since I started the company, has been, how do we gather a great team that wants to improve the quality of life of people? How do we convince doctors? How do we convince patients? And we do it in such a unique way that in markets like Colombia, we have more than 90% of the market share when it comes to insured medical cannabis. And there's a method by which we do all of these things in these markets that have, Latin America and Europe, more than 1 billion people. And these markets are in need for a new medication that can disrupt the traditional pharma route. And I think the fact that we're able to do this and own these markets ourselves, that's what's bringing Khiron's growth more than double digits every quarter. We started selling 1.5 years ago, and right now we're selling in Colombia, in Peru, in Brazil, in the UK, and in Germany. And enjoying that high profitability is building for us a very unique niche. So very excited to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
Great, thank you for the overview, Alvaro. One I wanted to touch on a little bit is underneath your clinic approach. You have your satellite clinics, you have your main hubs per se, like in Colombia, where the insurance pays for the medication that you help create and back test. More importantly, all of these procedures are based off of education. Can you describe the education platform you built? This is I think, a key differentiator for yourself, and how you operate that platform with a call center, how you work with it from an overall perspective of educating and using it as a delivery platform for telesales, et cetera. If you could please just give investors an overview of that comprehensive platform that underpins all of the satellite communication, or just the hospitals that you're in partnership with.
Of course, Rob. I mean, when we started about 3 years ago, and we are opening the Colombian market and Latin America, we were the first company to sell medical cannabis in Colombia ever. And so you start thinking, how do we build demand? And for that, we need to convince the doctors. The doctors will prescribe to the patients. How do we convince doctors? We have to provide them with evidence. How do we create evidence? Is by having access to data. And how do we generate data? Is by being able to have the access or own as much population as we can, which is why 3 years ago we started this idea by acquiring established pain and neurological health centers in Colombia with more than 100,000 patient visits a year. So that gives us the ability to bring patients every day, educate doctors, generate evidence on the benefits of medical cannabis, and then also on how to change the doctors' minds with all the evidence they're seeing every single day. I think one of the key aspects of our education is that the more we're able to service patients, the more we understand that medical cannabis is a top alternative for treating pain and treating epilepsy and other types of conditions. Whereas in the rest of the world, medical cannabis is always seen as a third-line alternative, right? And that change in perception is what's driving our growth. So if you picture this today, where you have, let's say, 700 patients going to a clinic in one day, and you know that because of all this evidence that we're building and the quality of the product and the willingness to prescribe of our doctors, because of this evidence and this show of data, that 1 out of 3 patients that come every day are living with a prescription, you're building yourself a very unique data set that then we are able to expand to other markets, like we are doing in Germany, where we started training doctors with the evidence that we're providing and that mindset that this is as good as alternative as the established pharmaceutical products. And so that's starting to change the perception of the doctors. And the more clinics we open, and we have very different formats depending on the population and what type of patients we want to acquire, so to speak. So yes, we have big flagships here in Bogota. We have satellite clinics in other cities. We use telehealth in the UK and in Colombia as well. We have partnerships with hospitals so we can set up our clinics in their locations. But it's really all about 2 things. One is generating evidence to convince doctors. And the other, most important, is about access. I think in regions where we are, with all these regulatory frameworks, access means the ability of a patient to be able to access medical cannabis in a safer and a faster way as possible. And I think the fact that we have our clinics, that we do a follow-up on the patients, that we talk to the doctors, that we talk to the patients, that we ask them how they're doing, that we actually have the ability to, in Colombia, for instance, deliver 95% of their medications at home. It's all about making medical cannabis accessible. And that, let's call it, obsession of the company is translated everywhere where we are. Of course, every country has a different regulation, but that doesn't change the fact that we want to make sure that a patient that goes into our clinics not only has great service, but is able to access medication much easier and much faster, complemented with a unique know-how of our doctors and the doctors that we have in our network, that medical cannabis works. And the fact that we have so many more prescriptions every day, it's because all of this access strategy and this data and this evidence that we're collecting and presenting are working. And that data allows us to tweak a little bit of our tactics every single week so that we can continue to service more patients. And I think that ability to grow our own, let's call it, domain with more clinics and more ways to access the patients, that's what's driving our growth. And we have a great response from our patients. We have very high brand loyalty on the products and the clinics. And so what we worry about most of the day is how do we provide more evidence? How do we convince more doctors? How do we convince more patients? And how fast can we deploy this strategy in the markets where we want to be, which is Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Brazil, UK, and Germany. And so that's, let's call it our day-to-day thoughts and our tactics. And I think it's working well. We have not stopped growing the last 5 quarters. And we are pioneers in Colombia, we are pioneers in Peru, and we are pioneers in Latin America. I think that first mover advantage and that unique strategy is going to create for us, a very important market dominance in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. I think talking about the overall where you're selling, would love to talk about help investors understand, there's been a lot of press around Germany now opening up per se their marketplace. Wondering if you can kind of help us understand what is first of all, the landscape in Germany and what are the major changes in regulations that investors should be paying attention to?
Well, Germany is the more established market of Europe. It's a market that's mostly dominated by dry flower. It's a market where doctors and patients are learning more about cannabis and becoming a lot more sophisticated. When we decided to come into Germany, we decided to come in there because if there's one thing this company knows how to do very well, is to provide training and convince doctors and increase their willingness to prescribe. We have proven we can do this in Colombia, in Peru, in Brazil, UK, and Germany. We know what type of evidence. We know how to talk to doctors from all sorts of specialities because of all this data we have. And then, it's a market that's mostly insured, that's working very well for us. We started in March of this year, and now Germany represents 30% of our medical cannabis sales in the quarter, right? And with very high profit margins, because if we are so focused on how do we get those doctors to prescribe, and we think about the access to the patients, then we start working backwards, and we have very many deals with many suppliers and partners so that we can provide for the patients what it is that they're looking for. But our ability to convince doctors in such a short period of time is all based on the fact that we have so much evidence. Now, that evidence that we're creating in Germany also comes back to Colombia and Brazil and Mexico, and we're creating an ecosystem of evidence that's convincing a lot more doctors. So Germany, even though it's been around for a while and there are certainly a lot of competitors there, I think our advantage is that because we are asset light, we're able to switch and look at different types of product offerings without having to make all these investments in our own production, but knowing that the doctors are prescribing and that this is covered by insurance. And the more quality of product we have, the more doctors are prescribing our products, the more of a market niche we're opening up. So Germany, of course, is very interesting. The purchasing power of the patient is much higher than in Latin America. We only work in the insurance covered market. And of course, I think the last couple of weeks, the big news out of Germany is the possibility of recreational use there with the new coalition. I think we have to go and wait and see a lot of these details, distribution, what type of requirements. But I think in the end, it's really about bringing cannabis to the main stage and breaking all these social and stigmas that we all have about a plant that can be much better than the current pharmaceutical products. And if you're a company that understands how to have that conversation and you have an efficient supply chain, just like Khiron does, I think this is going to be a tremendous market for us in the next 5 years. So I'm very excited, very happy that we made that decision. Of course, these things take time, but today we're looking at a very good German team that understands how to prescribe, how to convince doctors. And I think the results that we're showing are showing that we know how to do that. So it's just very early stages, but I'm very excited about the German market. And there's a lot of possibilities that may happen in the next couple of years there.
Great. I wanted to not ignore the UK. Obviously, you opened up a new clinic in London. Can you walk us through the UK market and how you decided on your approach to the UK and help us understand kind of the background of your thinking in opening up the facility in London?
Sure. I mean, again, going back to the original point, Rob, I think the clinics allow us to develop a lot of evidence to convince more doctors to prescribe cannabis.
Sure.
If I can make a comparison between the two regions, I would say Latin America, as big as it is a market where patients don't know they need it and doctors don't know how to prescribe it.
Sure.
And the UK is a market where the patients really want it and doctors yet don't feel enough comfortable to prescribe it. So when we're thinking about that, so, well, we are growing in the UK. We are part of this program called the Project 2021, which is how we started selling the UK. But certainly there is an opportunity there to be able to bring more doctors, bring more patients, and generate that demand. And knowing everything we know about medical cannabis, we said, well, why don't we add on top of this platform our ability to bring a lot more patients, have a lot more doctors trained by us in the, let's call it the Khiron way of understanding medical cannabis. And if we know that the patients are looking for an alternative, we just need to be able to give them a platform so that the doctors are able to prescribe. And to the doctors, because we're able to provide them all this evidence for the last year and a half with more than 15,000 or so individual patients, it gets them more comfortable because you're providing real world evidence that they barely get to see outside the normal course of business. So we are training doctors in the UK. We are certified so that they can have their own registration in courses in cannabis, and we're able to provide it with the evidence. And the more patients we are bringing, the more doctors want to work with us because we know how to get them comfortable around cannabis. Now, the UK is a more telehealth focused strategy, which is gives us the opportunity to expand much faster across anywhere in the UK. We started just a couple of weeks ago. We have full schedules already, and I think the more we can continue to show people and doctors and patients that we know what we're talking about, that we can get everybody more easy about what is medical cannabis all about, and we can provide more evidence, I think it's going to be a tremendous market for us.
Absolutely. I mean, I think when you look at the company and its entrance into new countries per se, it seems to be very well thought out with the regulatory framework in mind and the ability to convince doctors. When you look at doctors, net population of, I guess, stakeholders within your ecosystem, how attuned are they to the medication alternatives, whether it's opioids or sleep medication or et cetera, et cetera? I mean, there's a host of solutions that it would appear to be right for medical cannabis in terms of an alternative. I think you mentioned the third alternative. But when you look at the market size of replacing some of those, whether it's opioids, sleep medication, et cetera, it's a fairly large market. I mean, billions and billions. But what do you see as like the major linchpin that gets a doctor to say, I had a patient die of opioid addiction and now he's like totally against opioids and he wants to find an alternative? What is a trigger that you've seen getting doctors over that hump, or is it merely just overall education?
Well, I would say, Rob, that most doctors that we have encountered, most everywhere where we are, let's talk about pain being the biggest category. I don't think anybody is really excited about prescribing opioids at all. I think the stories from the United States and what you're seeing in some more pockets in the world are very negative. And I think doctors understand that this is a big problem. And it could be as big as the United States in the world if we don't control it. On the other hand of that is that medical cannabis, in terms of levels of evidence, we are not there yet as an industry at the same level as the opioid industry in terms of phase 1, 2, 3, 4 evidence. We recognized that 3 years ago. We said, well, one of the issues is that doctors believe in two types, generally, of course, in two types of evidence. One is, of course, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, right, for which you need hundreds of millions of dollars for investment, for research. And the other one is real world evidence. And that's why also we decided we should be looking at this clinic strategy, because we can provide to the doctors that real world evidence every single day. When doctors in our ecosystem are able to talk to their patients and look at the side effects. Is it working? Is it not working? Very unbiased. But you start seeing a lot more patients, happier about it, getting them off opiates like we have in our clinic today. That builds an incredible level of understanding and positivity around medical cannabis. That is hard to replicate outside our ecosystem because doctors are seeing in our clinics this every single day, and they're talking to patients and talking to other doctors. They're making decisions of who should be or not in cannabis, if cannabis is working for some patients or not. But on the other hand, they're looking at these positive responses from our patients, and that is building and building and building more and more a bigger willingness to prescribe. So yes, I think overall, it's not that everybody's happy about prescribing opioids because of these fears of addiction and all the dangers we know. On the other hand, if you don't provide this real world evidence, you're not giving the doctor many tools to think about switching medications. And I think that is really one of the keys of the clinics and the system and the data that we've been able to collect, because you're providing them with that, and it gives them another tool to make a decision. And the more tools you give them, the less afraid they will be of prescribing something that is, in my opinion, of course, something that can certainly disrupt this opioid industry, because we all know the stories, and those stories are true. And nobody wants to get hooked on these things. And medical cannabis is a very good alternative. You just have to show them the evidence, and that's what we're doing here. And that's why we have such a unique position, because we're able to provide this real world evidence every single day.
Absolutely. Wanted to turn to, I think, where investors are focused a little bit too, just south of us here in Mexico. Obviously, that's a new opportunity. As you look to 2022, what should we expect? Obviously, there's a ramp time and a time to getting doctors trained. Is there some milestones you can share with investors about how to think about Mexico and your progress there?
Yes, I think when I think about Mexico, I think three things. First one is, of course, there's a lot of expectation. There's a lot of smoke out there of what really is happening or can happen in Mexico. So we always have to be wary about all of that promotional aspect, because in the end, nobody's ever sold yet medical cannabis in Mexico. And it's because of these regulation aspects, which are always complex worldwide. The second thing I think about is, Khiron has proven since we started that we have a very unique understanding of regulation. We were the first company to sell in Colombia, first company to sell in Peru, first company to sell in Scotland. And so I understand, our team understands exactly what is required to take that medication into Mexico. And I think our investors can look at in the next couple of months that we'll be there, and we will be doing it the same kind of way, fully compliant and going through routes that nobody's thought about. And I think I'm very excited about the fact that we know today where we are standing in that, and that Mexico is going to be a reality for us in 2022. The third thing I think about is, okay, you get the product there, what happens next? And I think the last year and a half can prove to anybody, again, we know how to prescribe cannabis safely. We've been doing this in many other countries. We have a strategy that's very unique. And I think Mexico will be able to showcase yet again that clinic strategy in different types of formats is going to create for us tremendous growth. I think if we had started a year ago, if Mexico was open a year ago, we would be trying to figure out the strategy here and trying to figure out there. Today, we know exactly how it should be deployed. We know exactly how to train doctors. We've been training doctors in Mexico for the last year and a half. We're bringing doctors from Mexico to Colombia as we speak to be trained at the clinics to know how to prescribe it. So the issue is not only just how can you get it there, but then how you're going to build a market. And I think in building that market, Khiron has proven yet all over again that we know how to do that, that we can control a lot of our own destiny in there. And it's just a matter of time before we can get that product there. But afterwards, it's execution and deployment of those products and getting the patients to get prescribed. And I think that's what we are able to do very, I wouldn't say easily, but certainly more comfortable every day in Colombia. So how do we take that model into Mexico? I think that's our third concern. And the second, of course, is getting the product there. But with the regulatory know-how that we have and that we have proven over and over again, I don't think anybody should doubt that Khiron will be Mexico very soon. And we'll certainly think that we can be very big leaders in that market.
That's great. I think the understanding that sometimes gets missed when looking at Khiron is the great management team that you have, the understanding of regulations, etc. I know on your board member you have a partner that's from a law firm, etc. You have one of the best in Luis on the petroleum side. You've really built out a great board, including Vicente Fox from Mexico. Can you talk to the board about what you're seeing in the marketplace, or talk about the board members and how they're able to add value and help you really build a great company here?
Well, yes, Rob, I think I'm blessed with the fact that I have a fantastic team in the executives and everywhere, from the cultivation side to the nurses that see patients. I think everybody at Khiron understands that we do this for a purpose. It's very different to work for a company that's just selling cheap marijuana, right? To a company that's actually changing people's lives. And that bond that we've been able to create with everybody in the team, that's what gets us through all these tough times when you're having COVID and you're having all these, regulatory and unforeseen events that we have had in the last 2 years. We worry a lot about regulation and compliance, a lot. Because we are Colombian, we always, or at least I think, we have to always have a higher bar than anybody else when we come into a different country. In terms of the product and the sales and the doctors and the education, we have a team that understands this and has been building it. I think one of the challenges always for us that we are doing a lot of unique things first. So you have very few companies showing you the route because you are building it yourself. And of course, that means sometimes we have to make mistakes because somebody's got to learn this first. But I think the entire support of the company is really all about how do we find solutions quickly? How do we get this product? How do we think about access? It's not just about taking that cannabis product into Mexico. It's really about how does that patient access that bottle? And how do we work backwards to make sure that process is smooth? Getting the product into our countries is the easiest part of our job. The difficult part is how do we get that patient to change his or her life through medical cannabis? How do we make it easier? How do we do partnership with the drugstores and the pharmacies? How do we get the doctors trained? How do we explain to the patient how the entire route should be? Because that builds a moat, like we're doing in Colombia. And that moat can be very difficult for anybody to come into. Now, in terms of my board, we also build a board that understands international business, that understands financing, but also very importantly, that understands that these things that we're building are built for sustainable success. This is not a one-off, 1 quarter, great $1 million, and then next day that you got down to zero. And these type of things, of strategies, require a lot of discipline, a lot of patience. And I'm very lucky to have a board that understands that supports the company all the time, that challenged me a lot, of course, in terms of timing and markets, and is this the right strategy or not? Thankfully for us, our results and our sales and growth, and when people come here and see our clinics, our board members, and they see the level of effort that it takes and the uniqueness of our model, I think the next question they ask is, how do we do this faster? To which I say, well, nobody's doing it faster than us. But all of these things take time to build. But sure, if we're able to replicate our model, like in Colombia, where we have such a high market share, I think we'll be very successful. And I truly believe that they understand that. And it's really about teamwork. So how to make these things work and try to get all this know-how that I have in the table to make better decisions.
No, that's great. Well, Alvaro, thank you very much for running up against our time. I want to thank you for everything, your time today. To anyone out there who has not signed up yet for a one-on-one meeting, please email me at Breza, Breza, @lythampartners.com. Or again, visit www.lythampartners.com/virtual and click on the one-on-one meeting request. With that, I want to say thank you very much, and we'll end the call. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me today.